Hello, my name is Victoria Pontieri, and for Ancient Greek Art and Architecture class, I'll be talking to you about the origin of Kouroi and their features. The Kouros, a nude sculpture of a male youth, has been an important part of artistic growth during the archaic period in Greece. They were made of different types of mediums, ranging from different forms of stone such as marble to wood and more exotic options like ivory. The style of the figure is fairly realistic and proportional, with most of the figures being life-sized or larger than life, just to give that kind of air of importance. There are several beliefs that the Kouroi were intended for the god Apollo, as they were often found in his shrines, and they were made to look like him and seen posing in his likeness. He was seen posing as these figures were, and this was a very certain way with a front-on view. The shoulders are straight, and there's one leg stepping forwards. The hands may be resting at the sides, or the elbows might be up, but regardless, this was a frequent nod to Apollo. There were many other reasons, though, that these statues were created, and some were more personal. They became seen as funerary markers or commemoratory gifts for young noble youths. They were used in Olympic games, such as trophies for the winners, or even used as offerings for the gods, especially in this case Apollo. So the first of the Kouroi that were found and that we got our data on were in the island area of Delos, and they had a more natural style, staying true to the softness of the body's features. The proportions were a little bit rougher, though, in the beginning. They were trying to organize the shoulders, and they really kept the stance the same so they could focus on proportions. The features were not very intricate, and the depictions were always stark naked, and they never had armor or weapons. This is kind of like contrary, though, to the meaning of the statue, which often represented the eternal youth of those who died in battle in an honorable way. Which is kind of funny. During the 7th century BCE, when these figures started to pop up, the commonalities between them and the Egyptian figure sculptures at the time became a little bit undeniable. The ideas for the mathematical organization of the body's anatomy were related to those in Syrian and Egyptian culture. The Greeks were frequently trading with both of them at the time, which was convenient, so the idea is not far-fetched that the Greeks picked up some of their artisanal techniques when trading and conversing with them. The similarities between the Egyptian style of figures and those of the Greeks were fairly consistent with the idea that the Greeks borrowed some of the Egyptian style, even when you look at them at first glance. The stances are very similar, and the way that the bodies are built as well. The Kouroi are generally hairless, have one of their legs forward like they are taking a step, and have some hints of clothing, though nearly most of the time these figures are just nude. If they wear or are wearing clothing, a lot of the time it's just a belt or a simple cloth. These are all similarities between the Egyptian sculptures of the time period. Some other similar aspects of these types of sculptures were the forward-facing stances, the clenched fists with arm muscles tense and straight down by their hips, and stoic expressions. The style of these statues was very geometric, with cubic features on the flat face, flattened ears, sharp cheekbones, locked knees, large quads, and thumbs. Even though they were geometric, it was like a baseline, so they wound up softening the features afterward. A study done by the female scientist named Eleanor Golnernik showed some connections between the canons of proportion between the Egyptian and Greek archaic styles of sculpture. The Greek and Egyptian canons actually show a commonality in where the shoulders are slightly wider than the average man of the time period, and the waists were much narrower than the man of that time period. The vertical relation of the knees, waist, and hips, however, were much more in tune with an average man, and they were also consistent with each other, so the Egyptians' vertical proportions were similar to the Greeks'. Her original hypothesis followed a more specific idea that the different styles of Kouroi were influenced by the different styles of Egyptian sculpture, but the results proved more so that the Greeks were influenced by the beginning, only in the beginning, and modified it regionally, and with their own cultural ideas influencing it to create new styles. Her conclusion supports that the Sayunian group, the first Kouroi group, which dates back to 615 BCE, were influenced by the Egyptian and Assyrian sculpting styles heavily, but that the later groups were developed more so completely by the Greeks alone. The Sayunian group were the first set of Kouroi and fit the description of that similar to the Egyptian sculptures. The second group, which occurred during 590 BCE, known as the Orchmenos, was definitely influenced by the history of the time. The heavier laws imparted on the Greek public and even nobles prevented lavish funeral parties or celebrations, which put the style into a recession. The features became even more soft, with much less muscle definition. The arms and legs are often touching the body or each other instead of being fully separated. The next group, known as Tanea Volamandra, took place during 575 BCE, the Middle Archaic period. There is an attempt to deviate from the strict geometric style and impart more naturalized, three-dimensional forms into the curves and volumes of the muscle and finer features such as the ears. The next group, known as Melos, reverts back to the simpler ways of the Tanea group. The form is much generalized and smooth, though the joints, such as the neck and toes, are more properly rendered. The understanding of the three-dimensional form has improved, but is attempted to be simplified once again. This group actually happens to be one of the best preserved and had some stylistic changes scored toward naturalism, which may have been influenced by the other Greek art forms such as pottery, where people were exploring these types of concepts. The last two groups houses the well-known Kouros and Evesios, and the last Kouros known to be created. The understanding of anatomy is much greater from every view, including the profile of the spine. The joints, paths of articulation are more thought out and accurate, and the proportions are less exaggerated and blown up, though the body is strong. There's more attention paid to the muscles in the back, in the chest, and the facial features are a little softer. The very last group of the sculptures, created in 520 BCE, shows the marked improvement in realism and understanding of the human body. It is more along the lines of something entirely Greek, with so much deviation from the first Kouros that is almost entirely different in style. The proportions, bone structure, and muscular structure have finally fallen into place, but the stance and the facial expressions still give a nod to the original Kouros.